She stood alone by a forgotten memorial, talking to a name carved in stone, until a stranger picking up trash changed everything and gave her husband's sacrifice a voice the world could finally hear. What happened next will stay with you forever. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The coastal park was almost empty, the steady drizzle blurring the gray sky into the gray sea beyond. The memorial stones, wet and darkened by the rain, stretched in a silent half-circle facing the restless water. Claire Donovan stood alone, her hand resting on one of the cool slabs of stone where her husband's name was etched in careful letters. Staff Sergeant Luke Donovan. She didn't bring flowers. She didn't need to. Her voice was offering what mattered more, a memory carried in words that almost no one heard anymore. "I don't know if you can hear me, Luke," she whispered, tracing the worn letters with trembling fingers. "But I'm here. I'm still here." Her jacket was soaked through at the shoulders. Her hair clung to her forehead. She didn't notice. She barely noticed anything these days, except for the grinding loneliness that wrapped itself around her chest and squeezed tighter with every passing year. Around her, the world kept moving. Families with umbrellas, joggers skimming by, glancing at their watches, tourists snapping selfies with the cliffs in the background, not even pausing at the memorial. Claire stood invisible among them, holding a vigil no one asked her to keep. She closed her eyes and leaned her forehead against the stone. "I don't blame them," she murmured. "They forgot. I think sometimes I'm starting to forget too. How your laugh sounded, how you held my hand." Tears burned at the back of her throat. She swallowed them down. Again. At the edge of her vision, movement caught her eye. For a moment, she thought maybe it was someone coming to visit the memorial too, someone who remembered. Instead, it was a man in a plain hoodie and jeans, crouched near a trash bin. He was quietly gathering discarded coffee cups, paper wrappers, and bits of wind-blown litter, methodically cleaning the park even though no one asked him to. His back was to her, his shoulders moving steadily under the misty rain. Claire turned back to the stone, feeling foolish for hoping. She pressed her palm flat against Luke's name. "You deserved more than this," she whispered. "We all did." The rain dripped down her sleeves and pooled at her boots. She didn't move, didn't care. If the world was going to forget her husband, then she would remember him twice as hard. For both of them. As Keanu stood up, the quiet man straightened up, dropping a final handful of trash into a plastic bag. He turned slightly, and for a heartbeat, Claire locked eyes with him. His face was familiar, but not in the way of a celebrity or a friend. It was the kind of familiarity that came from kindness, seen once, long ago, and never forgotten. The man gave a small nod. Not the kind people gave to strangers out of politeness. Something deeper, a recognition, an acknowledgement of pain. Claire blinked. When she opened her eyes again, he had gone back to his quiet work, as if he had never meant to intrude at all. Claire wiped the rain from her face, unsure if it was water or tears. For a long time she just stood there, breathing in the salt of the ocean and the cold weight of the moment. Finally, gathering the little courage she had left, she stepped away from the memorial and crossed the path toward the benches overlooking the cliffs. The man was there now, tying up a bag of trash with slow, deliberate movements. He wore no name tag, no park maintenance uniform, just a battered hoodie and jeans that had seen better days. Claire hesitated, then found herself speaking before she could stop. "Thank you," she said softly. The man looked up, surprised, as if he wasn't used to being noticed. "For what?" he asked. "For caring," Claire said, her voice almost breaking. She gestured vaguely toward the empty benches, the litter, the memorial stones soaked in rain and indifference. "Most people just walk by." He gave a small shrug. Someone should care. There was no pretense in his voice, no false humility, just a simple truth, spoken without expectation of reward. Claire nodded, feeling something inside her loosen just a little. She lowered herself onto the nearest bench, her legs suddenly too tired to stand. "I come here every week," she said quietly. "My husband's name is on that wall, Luke Donovan. He died overseas, and The man listened without speaking, setting the trash bag aside. He sat on the far end of the bench, not crowding her, not leaving either. "I know it's been years," Claire went on, her hands twisting together in her lap. "But sometimes it feels like yesterday. And sometimes it feels like it happened to someone else entirely." The man nodded slowly, his eyes kind but steady. "Grief doesn't follow a clock," he said. Claire gave a shaky laugh. "Yeah, try explaining that to the rest of the world." She looked out at the ocean, its endless gray waves blurring into mist. "They may tell you to move on, start over, forget. But how do you forget someone who gave you everything?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back on the bench, letting the rain fall freely across his face, like he didn't even notice. "You don't forget," he said after a long moment. "You carry it. You carry them." Claire turned to study him, really study him this time. His face was lined with the kind of weariness that didn't come from age alone. It came from seeing too much, feeling too deeply, surviving too long in a world that sometimes forgot what sacrifice looked like. "Thank you," she said again, but this time the words were heavier, fuller. He smiled, a small, sad smile, and stood up, lifting the trash bag with one hand. "I'll be around," he said simply. And then, before she could ask his name, he walked away down the path, blending into the rain, leaving Claire sitting alone, but somehow less alone than before. Claire remained on the bench long after the man disappeared from sight, her thoughts spinning, slower now, like a record finding the right groove after skipping for too long. For months, maybe longer, she had carried her grief like a secret, tucked away behind polite smiles and short answers. Friends had stopped calling. Neighbors avoided her eyes in the grocery store. Even her own parents, though well-meaning, didn't know how to sit with the heavy silence her loss left behind. But that stranger had sat with it, with her, without rushing her to be okay. Claire pulled her jacket tighter around her as the rain fell harder. She leaned forward, elbows on knees, staring at the sodden earth. The memorial stones gleamed like dark glass under the storm clouds. She thought of Luke, his crooked grin, the way he used to whistle when he folded laundry, the warmth of his arms lifting their daughter after a long deployment. The world had moved on. She had not. From the path beyond the benches, a small voice called out. Claire turned, startled, to see her daughter Mia skipping carefully across the puddles with her rain boots. Claire hadn't realized how much time had passed. "Mommy, look!" Mia held up a fistful of soggy wildflowers she had picked near the edge of the path. Claire smiled through the ache in her chest and opened her arms. Mia ran to her, wrapping small arms around her neck, pressing her cold, damp cheek against Claire's. For a moment, Claire closed her eyes and let the world fall away. Only the steady pulse of her daughter's heartbeat and the muted roar of the ocean remained. When she opened her eyes again, the stranger was truly gone. No trace of him but the cleaned-up memorial, the trash gone from the grass, the faint warmth he had left behind. Claire kissed Mia's forehead and stood, gathering her purse and their umbrella. Before they left, she knelt by the stone bearing Luke's name, placing the soggy flowers at its base. "I'll come back," she whispered. "I promise." She squeezed Mia's hand, and together they walked slowly back toward the parking lot, rain pattering on the umbrella above them. As they reached their car, Claire caught one last glimpse of the coastal park, the empty benches, the silent stones, the place where grief had found her. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was standing there alone. Somehow, without saying much at all, a stranger had reminded her. Her story wasn't over. It was just beginning again. The next afternoon, when the clouds finally broke apart into wisps of pale blue, Claire found herself steering her old sedan back toward the coastal memorial. She told herself it was for Mia, to let her run around the park again, to feel something like normalcy. But in her heart, she knew it was more than that. Something about the quiet man's presence lingered in her mind, like a stubborn melody she couldn't shake. As they approached the memorial, Claire tightened her grip on the steering wheel. There he was again. The same man, this time without the raincoat, but still simple. Jeans, worn boots, and a gray t-shirt under a light jacket. He moved slowly, methodically, picking up a crushed soda can that had rolled across the path. Claire parked and hesitated, watching him for a moment. Mia was already wriggling out of her car seat, eager to explore. Claire grabbed the umbrella just in case and stepped out. As she approached the memorial stone, the stranger glanced up. Their eyes met briefly, an unspoken acknowledgement. Claire felt a strange sense of safety in that look. Something rare and unexpected. Without thinking too hard about it, she found herself speaking, her voice sharper than she intended. "Does anyone even care anymore?" Claire blurted out, waving a hand toward the neglected flowers and trash scattered across the memorial site. "They build these walls and carve their names, and then they forget us." The man didn't flinch. He didn't argue or offer shallow comfort. He simply set down the trash bag he had been carrying and stood silently, giving her space. Maybe it was the storm inside her, finally too heavy to carry. Maybe it was the kindness in his silence. But once the dam cracked, the words came pouring out. "My husband died in Afghanistan," Claire said, her voice catching. "He gave everything. And what did we get in return? A folded flag, a 21-gun salute, and then nothing. No one calls, no one checks if you're okay. They all move on, but we're still here, me and my daughter. Stuck." She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes, trying to stop the tears, but they slid down anyway, warm and angry. "Audio drama. I can't even afford to fix the leak in our roof," she said, laughing bitterly. "And sometimes at night when it's quiet, I wonder if it would have been easier if I'd just disappeared with him." The man's expression didn't change. No pity, no awkward apologies, only something deep and unwavering in his eyes, something that said, "I hear you. I see you." For the first time in a long time, Claire didn't feel like she had to apologize for hurting. She sniffed and wiped her cheeks on her sleeve. "Sorry," she mumbled. "You didn't ask for all that." The man shook his head, slow and gentle. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and steady. You don't have to be sorry." Claire blinked at him, the weight in her chest shifting slightly, not gone, but shared. She looked down at the worn duffel bag at his feet, filled with discarded wrappers, broken bottles, forgotten things. It hit her then. He wasn't paid to be here. He wasn't obligated. He chose to show up, just like he chose to stay and listen now. Claire sat down on the low stone edge of the memorial, wrapping her arms around her knees, suddenly exhausted. Mia darted among the benches, her small sneakers kicking up damp leaves, oblivious to the heavy conversation unfolding. The man remained standing nearby, giving Claire enough space to breathe, but close enough that she didn't feel alone. "My husband's name was Daniel," she said after a long silence, her voice steadier now. "He loved the ocean. Used to say he wanted to retire somewhere like this, teach Mia how to surf. Instead, he got a headstone and a certificate." She stared out toward the distant line where the sea kissed the gray sky. "I come here because it's the only place that still feels real," she whispered. "The house feels too big without him. The future feels empty." The man crouched down, resting his elbows on his knees, still not speaking, just being there. Claire found herself grateful for it. No false promises. No pretending that a few kind words could stitch her life back together. "Sometimes I talk to him," Claire admitted, a faint, embarrassed smile tugging at her mouth. "Not out loud, usually, just in my head. I ask him what I'm supposed to do now." She shook her head, laughing under her breath. "He doesn't answer." The man finally spoke, his voice rough with emotion he didn't try to hide. "Maybe he's answering more than you know." Claire lifted her gaze sharply, caught off guard by the rawness of that response. "How?" she asked, her voice nearly breaking. The man shrugged lightly, the ghost of a smile crossing his face. "You're still here. You're still standing. That's an answer." Claire bit her lip hard, trying not to cry again. His words didn't fix anything. They didn't magically erase her grief or her loneliness, but they acknowledged it, and that acknowledgement wrapped around her like a blanket on a cold morning. "You have kids?" she asked quietly, surprising herself with the question. The man hesitated, then nodded. "Not by blood," he said, "but yeah, I've got people I would walk through fire for." Claire smiled. A real one this time, small and fragile, but real. "I think Daniel would have liked you," she said. The man's eyes softened. "Sounds like he was the kind of man worth knowing." Claire nodded, the lump in her throat too thick to answer. Another gust of wind stirred the leaves around them. Mia came running back, her cheeks flushed from playing. She threw herself into Claire's lap, chattering about a butterfly she had seen. Claire hugged her tightly, burying her face in Mia's damp hair. When she looked up again, the man was rising to his feet, brushing dirt from his palms. "Take care of each other," he said simply, before turning to walk down the path toward the parking lot. Claire watched him go, a strange ache blooming in her chest. She didn't even know his name. But somehow, in the space of a few minutes, he had given her something she hadn't realized she was still desperate for. Hope. Not loud, not dramatic, just the quiet, stubborn kind that refuses to die. Claire sat there for a long moment after the man disappeared around the curve of the path. The rain had softened to a mist, clinging to her hair and Mia's curls like tiny silver threads. She should have felt silly sitting there in the wet, hugging her daughter to her chest, but she didn't. For the first time in months, the weight she carried felt ever so slightly lighter. Mia wriggled in her lap, looking up with wide, questioning eyes. "Mama, who was that man?" Claire brushed a strand of hair from Mia's forehead, thinking. "Just someone kind," she said finally. "Someone who listened." Mia nodded solemnly, as if that made perfect sense. They gathered their things slowly. Claire tucked the damp teddy bear under one arm and slipped the folded American flag back into her worn tote bag. She wiped off Daniel's name on the stone with the sleeve of her jacket, her hand lingering there just a little longer than usual. As they made their way to their car, Claire glanced back once more toward the memorial. In the distance, she could see the man again, not leaving, but still there, now kneeling by another headstone, gathering up soggy fast food wrappers and empty soda cans. He wasn't doing it for recognition. There were no cameras, no crowd, no applause. He was doing it because he cared. Quietly, stubbornly, without expecting anything in return. Claire swallowed hard. In a world that sometimes felt so cold, so indifferent, this small, nameless kindness meant more than she could explain. They drove home in silence, Mia dozing off in the back seat, the rhythmic tapping of rain against the windshield filling the spaces between Claire's thoughts. That night, after putting Mia to bed, Claire sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the few framed photos she had left of Daniel. She traced the edges of one, their wedding day, with the tip of her finger. For the first time since the funeral, she whispered into the dark kitchen, "I'm still here. I'm still trying." Maybe that was enough. Maybe, somehow, Daniel already knew it. And maybe tomorrow she would come back to the memorial. Not because she was stuck in the past, but because remembering him was a way to keep walking forward. She didn't know if she would ever see the quiet stranger again. Maybe he had been a momentary gift, like a shooting star across a bleak sky. Or maybe, just maybe, life was full of people like him. People who showed up quietly, changed everything, and then faded into the background without asking for thanks. Claire smiled through her tears. She would find a way to honor Daniel, She would find a way to live. Again. And maybe, just maybe, she would find the strength to believe that kindness could still change the world. Even starting with one tired widow, one small girl, and one broken piece of a heart that refused to give up. That evening, after returning home from the coastal town, Keanu sat at his small desk by the window, the night heavy around him. He didn't turn on the big lights. He didn't put on any music. He just opened his laptop and stared for a while at the blank page on the Foundation's forum. The story of Claire sat on his heart like a stone. It wasn't just her story, it was the story of countless others, those who gave, those who lost, and those who were left to pick up the pieces, in silence. He began typing carefully, his fingers slow, deliberate. There was a woman I met today. She sat by a broken memorial under the rain, speaking to a name etched in stone, while the world rushed by without seeing her. She carries the weight of a husband lost to war, the weight of raising a daughter alone, the weight of memories stitched into the quiet spaces of her life. She's not asking for pity, she's not asking for applause, she's asking, silently, for someone to witness the burden she can't set down. At the bottom of the post, Keanu added a question. Have you ever felt invisible while carrying something heavy? Then he hit post. He sat back in his chair, uncertain. Would anyone answer? Would anyone even care? Within minutes, the first comment appeared, and then another, and another. They came in waves, like a tide he hadn't expected. A woman wrote, "After my husband died overseas, the hardest part wasn't the funeral. It was the days after, when the world expected me to smile again." A young man shared, "My father was a firefighter. After he was gone, nobody asked about him anymore. It felt like losing him twice." One woman, a mother of two, said, "My son came home, but he wasn't the same. Every day I carry his silence like a stone in my chest." Keanu read every word. He didn't rush. He let each story settle. There was one comment that caught him in a way he couldn't shake. It was short, just a few lines, but it stayed with him long after he closed his laptop. It read, "Grief doesn't fade. It waits to be witnessed." Keanu closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the truth of it settle into the room around him. It wasn't about fixing. It wasn't about solving. It was about standing beside the broken-hearted without turning away. It was about showing up, even when there were no easy answers. He thought of Claire, sitting by the memorial in the rain. He thought of the countless others whose grief lived quietly beneath the surface of everyday life. He made a silent promise to himself that night. He would not forget her. He would not let the story end with a stranger picking up trash in the rain, save for the wedding ring she wore. And he would find a way to honor her husband. And he would find a way to honor all the ones like him, the unseen heroes, the silent burdens, the broken hearts, still beating against all odds. The next morning, Keanu returned to the forum and found hundreds more comments waiting. The community that had sprung up overnight was unlike anything he had seen before. It wasn't just sympathy, it was recognition. Strangers shared memories that had been locked away for years. One man posted, "I used to sit in my truck outside my wife's grave because I didn't know how to tell anyone that I couldn't move on. I didn't want to be seen crying like that." A young widow wrote, "My husband's best friend checks on me once a month. He says almost nothing. He just sits on the porch and drinks coffee. I never realized until now. That's enough. That's everything." Keanu read through them, feeling his chest tighten with each passing story. He realized something important, something no movie or award or speech had ever taught him. It wasn't grand gestures that healed wounds like these. It was presence. It was the willingness to stand in the rain with someone when the world rushed by. Claire's story had opened a floodgate, and Keanu knew he couldn't leave it there. Without asking permission or seeking applause, he picked up the phone. He called Sophia, the quiet force behind his foundation, the one who never sought headlines, but always found solutions. "I need your help," he said simply. Within an hour, they had a plan forming. They would find a way to honor the memories that too many had been asked to carry alone. Not with fanfare, not with cameras, but with action. Scholarships for children of the fallen, grants for families left behind, memorial sites repaired and made beautiful again. And above all, spaces where the invisible could be seen, where the broken could belong without needing to pretend they were whole. As the day went on, Keanu kept checking the forum. Every few minutes, new stories appeared, new confessions, new hopes. One woman wrote, "My daughter was 3 when her father died. She's 8 now. Every time she asks about him, I wonder if I'm strong enough to answer." Another post said simply, "My brother died saving people he didn't even know. Some days, I just want someone to say his name." Keanu leaned back in his chair, letting the quiet fill the room. Claire's words from the rain echoed back to him. It's like he died twice, the day he left and the day people stopped remembering. No one deserved to feel forgotten after giving everything. No one deserved to carry their grief alone. Keanu scribbled something on a piece of paper next to his laptop, a promise to himself and maybe to all the silent hearts out there. Memory is sacred. We will not let it fade. The Foundation's next steps would be simple but profound. Create scholarships. He'll laboriously slip down the memories. Is tell the stories no one else was telling. Witness, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. That night, under a quiet sky, Keanu made another silent promise. He would go back to the park. He would find Claire again. And he would start, not by offering solutions, but by standing beside her. In the rain, in the silence, in the sacred, invisible weight that too many had been asked to carry alone. 2 days later, something unexpected happened. An email arrived at the Foundation's general inbox. It was from a teenage boy named Jordan. He wrote, "My dad was a Navy corpsman. He saved people, but he never made it back. I don't remember much about him, but reading Claire's story made me feel like maybe he still matters." Keanu read it twice, then 3 times. There was no request for money, no plea for help, just a boy reaching out to say, "I see him. I still see him." Keanu thought about that for a long time. Sometimes the act of remembering was the purest form of honor there was. The forum became a living tribute, a digital wall not made of marble or polished brass, but of raw human truth. Messages poured in from across the country. A woman in Montana shared how she wore her late husband's dog tags every year on his birthday. A firefighter from Texas confessed he still drove by the house of his fallen best friend's mother just to make sure the porch light was on. One line kept appearing, over and over, from different people in different words. The Maddie mattered. They still matter. Keanu felt a quiet fire ignite inside him. It wasn't enough to listen. It wasn't enough to share. Action had to follow. Claire's pain, her anger, her loneliness, they were not isolated. They were part of a silent national symphony no one wanted to hear, because it hurt too much to face. But Keanu knew better now. Pain deserved witnesses. And love, even broken love, deserved to be honored. That week, the Foundation created a new branch, inspired by Claire's story. It was called simply The Second Promise. Its mission was simple: never let a fallen hero's family feel forgotten. Scholarships, restoration projects, anonymous grants, and most importantly, a space where grief was not shamed, where names could be spoken aloud without fear of being told to move on. Claire's story was no longer just her own. It was a spark. And Keanu, along with everyone touched by her courage, would help keep that spark alive. He closed his laptop that night, tired but hopeful. Tomorrow, he would go back to the park. Tomorrow, he would find Claire again, not as a stranger, but as someone who finally understood that sometimes the greatest thing you can give someone carrying invisible weight is your unwavering, quiet, stubborn presence. Standing beside them, in the rain, in the silence, for as long as it takes. Claire unlocked the door with a slow, familiar motion, balancing her purse in one hand and the memorial flowers in the other. The small apartment smelled faintly of stale coffee and laundry detergent, the aroma of survival. Bills leaned against each other on the chipped counter. Red notices, final warnings, polite demands dressed as letters. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Emma sat cross-legged on the worn carpet, crayon clutched tightly in her small fist. She was drawing a picture of a house, a bright sun, a figure that looked vaguely like a man standing just outside the front door. Claire's heart twisted. 5 years old, too young to carry grief, yet somehow Emma had learned to carry it anyway. Claire set the flowers in a cracked glass vase on the kitchen table and crouched down beside her daughter. She traced the edge of the drawing with her eyes. "Who's that?" she asked softly, tapping the figure with a fingertip. Emma didn't look up. "Daddy," she said simply, coloring a bright blue sky over his head. Claire closed her eyes for a moment. A rush of guilt flooded her chest, tightening her ribs until she thought they might crack. Why was she here, coloring on the floor with a daughter who deserved so much more? Why was her husband buried in the ground while she floated, half alive, through days that never seemed to change? The apartment walls seemed smaller tonight, the ceiling lower. Claire stood and shuffled through the bills, trying to find one that didn't scream in capital letters. Rent due, utilities overdue, credit minimums. She felt the shame burn hot under her skin, the heavy, familiar whisper that she was failing her husband's memory. She had promised him once, standing in their kitchen before he deployed for the last time, that no matter what, she'd keep going. She hadn't realized how hard going could be when every step felt like betrayal. On the kitchen counter, her husband's folded flag sat inside a simple wooden triangle frame. Claire brushed a finger across the glass, smudging the dust. "Sorry," she whispered under her breath. In the distance, thunder rolled over the ocean. Another storm coming. Claire turned off the overhead light and sat on the floor beside Emma, pulling an old blanket over both of them. She couldn't fix the world tonight. She couldn't erase the loneliness. She couldn't bring him back. But she could stay. That would have to be enough. For now. Meanwhile, across town, Keanu sat in a small diner booth with a battered laptop balanced on the table. He scrolled through endless lists of foundations, grants, support programs for families of fallen heroes. Many were outdated, underfunded, closed due to lack of awareness. He scribbled notes onto a napkin, names, numbers, ideas. Not once did he think about headlines or cameras or recognition. It was simpler than that. He had seen the weight Claire carried, and even if he couldn't lift it entirely, he could be another pair of hands holding the edges, keeping it from crushing her. The waitress refilled his coffee. Keanu nodded, offered a soft thank you, and went back to work. Outside, the rain came harder. But for the first time in a long while, someone was quietly gathering the broken pieces. Not to erase the past, but to help build something strong enough to carry it forward. The next morning, Claire sat at the small kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee gone cold. Emma sat opposite her, still in pajamas, humming quietly as she colored. The television flickered silently in the background, showing cartoons neither of them really watched anymore. Claire glanced at her phone. No new messages, no missed calls, just a screen full of reminders for bills, appointments, deadlines she could barely manage. She set the phone down, pressing her palms into her eyes. She was so tired of fighting battles no one could see. Outside, the rain had eased into a misty drizzle. Claire considered bundling Emma up and going out to the park, just to move, just to breathe something that didn't smell like sorrow and unpaid notices. Across town, Keanu leaned against the counter of a dusty non-profit office tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop. The woman behind the desk looked worn but kind, her name tag reading Linda, Fallen Families Support Network. He explained, simply and without fanfare, that he was hoping to make a donation, quietly, and perhaps see if there were scholarships or grants that could directly support young widows and children. Linda's eyes widened slightly when she recognized him, but she didn't fawn or ask for selfies. She just nodded, businesslike but touched. "We have more families than we have funds," she said, voice rough with emotion she was too tired to hide. "Anything helps." Keanu asked for the specifics, how much it would cost to fully fund educational support for children who lost a parent in active duty. Linda ran the numbers. When she finished, Keanu simply nodded. "I'll cover it," he said. No big announcement, no press release, just a promise. Quiet and real. Back at the apartment, Claire gathered Emma's raincoat and boots, helping the little girl button up the bright pink jacket that still smelled faintly of crayons and sunshine. Emma laughed when Claire messed up the last button on purpose, giggling into her mother's side. For a moment, the heaviness lifted. Just a moment. They walked hand in hand down the cracked sidewalk toward the park. The memorial stood on the far edge of the grass, its metal plaques dulled by years of salt air and rain. Claire's stomach twisted at the sight. Trash still littered the base. Empty cans, fast food wrappers, cigarette butts. She almost turned back, but Emma tugged her forward. "Let's say hi to Daddy," she said simply. Claire swallowed the lump in her throat and kept walking. When they reached the memorial, Claire knelt beside her husband's name. She traced the letters with careful fingers, the way she once traced the outline of his jaw after long deployments. "Hey," she whispered, "we're still here." Emma crouched beside her, placing a daisy plucked from a neighbor's yard, probably, at the base of the stone. Claire felt her heart crack open. It wasn't the grand gestures that healed you. It was the small ones. And somewhere, across town, a man who had once been a stranger was quietly moving mountains so that she and Emma could keep standing, without even asking for thanks. The next day, Claire returned to the memorial. She wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the way the clouds had broken open, letting pale sunlight fall across the park. Maybe it was Emma's insistence that Daddy needed more flowers today. Maybe it was the tiny, stubborn hope stirring somewhere inside her chest that maybe she wasn't as forgotten as she thought. When they arrived, Claire stopped short. Someone had been here. The trash was gone. The rusted plaques had been carefully scrubbed and polished. Fresh flowers lined the base of the stone, red, white, and blue bouquets arranged with quiet reverence. A new, small American flag fluttered in the breeze beside the memorial. Claire's knees wobbled, and she sat down heavily on a nearby bench, clutching Emma's tiny hand. It wasn't just the cleanup. It was the care. Someone had seen the brokenness and decided it deserved beauty again. She spotted a laminated card tucked among the flowers. Curiosity prickled at her as she leaned forward to read it. It wasn't signed. It simply said, "For the heroes we lost, for the families still carrying them. You are not invisible." Claire pressed the back of her hand to her mouth, struggling to hold back the flood of emotion. Emma hugged her side tightly. "Mommy, Daddy's smiling," Emma whispered. Claire believed her. Later that night, Claire tucked Emma into bed and sat at the kitchen table, long after the house had gone quiet. She thought about the stranger in the park, his kindness, his silence. And somewhere deep inside, a door creaked open. A door she had long since locked and bolted. Maybe there was still a way forward. Not to forget. Never that, but to carry love forward in a way her husband would have wanted. Outside the apartment window, the stars blinked faintly through the misty clouds. Claire leaned back in her chair, closed her eyes, and allowed herself, for the first time in months, to imagine a future that didn't feel like betrayal. It was small. Yes, it was fragile, but it was a beginning. And she owed it, in part, to a man she barely knew, a man who hadn't tried to fix her. He had simply seen her. And sometimes that was enough to start breathing again. Keanu never said a word to Claire. He didn't believe in grand gestures. He believed in small, meaningful ones. The kind that restored dignity without asking for anything in return. A few days after their first encounter, he returned to the coastal memorial in the early morning mist, long before the sun fully rose. In one gloved hand, he carried a simple notebook. In the other, a list of quiet promises he had made to himself. The memorial wasn't broken in a way that screamed for attention. It was broken in quieter, sadder ways. Weeds curling around the stone base, cracked benches leaning at uneven angles, a flagpole that had rusted into a tilt. It deserved better. The families deserved better. The memories deserved better. Keanu didn't call the news. He didn't call sponsors. He didn't call in favors. He called a small local landscaping company and paid them himself. He hired a local veteran-owned construction crew to replace the benches, to fix the cracked walkway, to sand and repaint the leaning flagpole. When asked for the billing name, he gave only 2 words: in honor. The workers didn't ask questions. They simply showed up before dawn each morning, working quietly, respectfully, under the soft roar of the ocean. Over 3 days, the memorial transformed. Fresh mulch was laid around the base. Native flowers, strong, resilient blooms, were planted along the outer ring. The broken flagpole was righted and polished to a gleaming silver, crowned once more with a crisp American flag that caught the early winds like a living thing. The benches were sanded smooth, restained, and bolted securely into the ground. Beneath each one, a small bronze plate was installed, each bearing a simple inscription: in gratitude. By the time the sun fully rose on the 3rd day, the park no longer looked abandoned. It looked loved. Keanu stood back across the street, hands in his pockets, watching as the final touches were placed. No one knew he had done it. That was exactly the way he wanted it. Claire hadn't planned to visit the memorial that afternoon. It had been a rough morning. Emma had spilled juice on the rent bill, and Claire had spent an hour trying to clean it while holding back frustrated tears. She didn't know why her feet led her to the coast. Maybe she just needed a place where the world didn't expect anything from her. The moment she stepped through the park entrance, she froze. Something was different. For a long moment, Claire simply stood there, her hand unconsciously tightening around the strap of her worn purse. Her heart pounded without knowing why. The first thing she noticed was the flagpole. It stood tall and straight now, the flag rippling proudly against the soft afternoon breeze. No rust, no tilt. It looked honored. Claire's eyes swept lower. Fresh flowers lined the base of the memorial stone, their colors vivid against the newly laid earth. Yellow coreopsis, blue salvia, red gaillardia, all hardy, all beautiful. The benches, she remembered how they used to sag when she sat, how she always had to shift her weight to avoid a splinter. Now they stood sturdy and strong, stained a rich walnut brown, and the little plaques beneath them shimmered softly in the light. In gratitude, Claire's throat tightened. Tears blurred her vision as she stumbled forward, reaching out to run her fingers along the smooth new surface of the memorial stone. It was clean now, polished, free of the grime and neglect that had weighed it down for years. Her husband's name seemed to glow against the stone. She dropped to her knees without caring about the damp grass or the curious looks from passing joggers. The ache that had lived in her chest for so long cracked open, and something else leapt through. Not pity, not guilt. Honor. Someone had cared enough to see. Someone had cared enough to fix what had been broken, not with announcements, not with speeches, but with quiet love. Claire pressed her forehead against the stone, the coolness grounding her spiraling emotions. Her shoulders shook, but she didn't sob. These weren't tears of collapse. They were tears of relief, of being seen. She whispered her husband's name over and over again, like a prayer finally answered. Claire sat there for a long time, letting the sounds of the ocean and the rustle of the trees sink into her. When she finally rose, she noticed something tucked behind one of the new benches. A small wreath made of driftwood, shells, and tiny white flowers. A card was pinned to it, handwritten in simple ink. Due no eres. For those who stood, even when no one saw. You are not forgotten. No name, no organization, just words that felt like a hand placed gently over her heart. Claire pressed her hand against her mouth, trying to hold in the wave of emotion swelling in her chest. She wasn't used to gestures like this, kindness without a face, without a demand, without expectation. She wasn't used to feeling remembered. Emma tugged at her coat hem. Claire knelt down and picked her daughter up, holding her close. She turned so Emma could see the cleaned memorial, the bright flowers, the proud flag snapping in the wind. "Look, baby," Claire whispered, her voice shaking. "They fixed it." Emma smiled and clapped her small hands. Claire kissed the top of her daughter's head, feeling something anchored deep inside her chest, a reminder that grief wasn't just a burden. It was also proof of love, and that love, even bruised and battered, could still plant new roots. Across the field, she caught sight of the man again, the one who had been picking up trash before. He was standing near the parking lot now, watching the waves. His presence wasn't intrusive, it was almost protective. Claire thought about walking over, about thanking him, but something told her not to. Some gifts weren't meant to be interrupted. Some moments weren't meant to be explained. She smiled to herself instead, holding Emma tighter, and turned back toward the memorial, toward the promise that she wasn't as alone as she had believed. The sky cracked open a little, and a narrow ray of sunlight slipped through the clouds, casting a soft glow across the stone. Claire whispered 2 words under her breath, words that caught in the wind and scattered toward the ocean. Thank you, even if the person who deserved to hear them never knew they were meant for him. Claire hesitated at the edge of the memorial, clutching 2 steaming cups of coffee. The breeze tugged strands of hair from her bun as she watched the man quietly sweeping leaves from the walkway, his movements steady, patient, unnoticed by the few visitors passing by. Keanu Reeves, she had finally realized. But it wasn't the fame that struck her most. It was the way he blended into the background, working without acknowledgement, as if restoring dignity to this place mattered more than being seen. Gathering her courage, Claire approached him. "I thought you could probably use this," she said, her voice awkward but sincere, holding out one of the coffees. Keanu looked up, surprised, then smiled. Gentle, humble, and accepted the cup with a soft, "Thank you." No fanfare, no discomfort, just gratitude. They moved to a nearby weathered picnic table under the salt-bitten trees, sitting a respectful distance apart. Claire wrapped her hands around her cup, feeling the warmth seep into her cold fingers. For a while they sipped in silence. Claire glanced at the memorial, at her husband's name etched in cold stone, and found herself speaking before she could second-guess it. "You know," she began softly, "after everything happened, people stopped calling. They meant well, I guess, but no one knew what to say, so they said nothing." Keanu nodded, listening intently, his cup cradled loosely in his hands. Claire stared into her coffee. It was like I disappeared, like he disappeared, and I guess after a while, you start wondering if maybe you were supposed to. The confession hung between them, raw and trembling. Keanu didn't rush to respond. He didn't fumble for empty words or platitudes. He just stayed there, anchored in the heavy quiet, refusing to let her sit alone in it. And somehow, that was enough. Claire blinked rapidly, forcing back the tears burning her eyes. She hadn't planned to say any of that, especially not to a stranger. But he wasn't really a stranger anymore, was he? He was someone who had shown up when no one else had, someone who hadn't looked away from her grief. And right now, that felt like the rarest gift in the world. Claire found herself tracing the rim of her coffee cup with one finger, grounding herself. The old picnic table creaked softly as the breeze pushed against it, carrying the faint smell of the sea. "I used to think grief was loud," Claire said after a moment. "Crying in the shower, screaming into pillows, but it's not. It's quiet. It's folding laundry alone. It's hearing your daughter's laugh and wondering if he would have laughed too. It's putting out 2 plates and realizing you only need 1. Keanu's face softened, his posture open but steady. He didn't interrupt, didn't shift uncomfortably. He let her pour it out, at her own pace. Claire smiled weakly. "Sorry. You didn't sign up for a therapy session." He shook his head slowly. "No apologies," he said, his voice low and sincere. "Some things are too heavy to carry alone." The words wrapped around her like a thin, unexpected warmth. No pity, no fixing, just acknowledgement. Claire looked at him then, really looked. At the slight sag of his shoulders, the faint tiredness in his eyes. There was something about him that suggested he knew about carrying invisible weights too. "Did you lose someone?" she asked carefully. Keanu smiled faintly, a smile edged with memory. "Not in the way you did. But I've lost. And I've learned that sometimes the best way to honor them is just to keep showing up, even when it hurts." Claire blinked hard, willing herself to hold it together. The rain had eased, but the ground was still wet beneath their feet, the world still gray and muted. After a long pause, she whispered, "I don't know how to show up anymore. Not for me. Not for Emma." Keanu tilted his head slightly. "You're here," he said simply. "You came today, you brought flowers, you spoke his name. That's showing up." Claire turned her face toward the sky, letting a single tear slip down unnoticed. They sat there like that for a while, 2 strangers bonded by the ache of love lost, the stubborn will to keep putting one foot in front of the other. And when Claire finally stood to leave, her coffee cup empty and her heart a fraction less heavy, Keanu stood too. No promises, no grand declarations, just presence. And somehow, in a world that had felt so hollow for so long, that was enough to give her a flicker of hope. The next few minutes unfolded in simple, ordinary ways. Claire gathered the wrappers from the table, instinctively tidying as she always did when her heart was uneasy. Keanu helped without a word, their movements synchronized by an unspoken rhythm of respect. As they walked together back toward the parking lot, Claire glanced sideways. She found herself wondering who he really was. Not his name. He hadn't offered it, and somehow she liked that. In a world where everyone seemed to need introductions, fame, explanations, here was someone who asked for nothing except to share the moment. At the edge of the lot, she paused. Her small sedan sat alone under a dripping pine tree, while his motorcycle, an older model, battered but cared for, waited nearby. Claire hesitated, the keys cold in her hand. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice barely above the hush of the rain. Keanu gave a small nod, one that felt heavier than it looked. "Take care of yourself, and your little one." The mention of Emma squeezed her heart in a way she hadn't expected. "I'm trying," she whispered. He offered the faintest smile. "That's enough for today." She watched him for a second longer, then slid into her car, starting the engine with a low growl. Through the misting windshield, she saw him pick up a few more scattered pieces of trash before swinging his leg over the motorcycle and riding away into the soft gray fog. Claire sat there for a while after he disappeared, hands on the steering wheel, breath catching in her chest. It wasn't magic. Her problems weren't solved. Her grief hadn't vanished. But for the first time in months, maybe years, she didn't feel entirely alone inside it. The world, cruel and beautiful, broken and sacred, kept spinning. And maybe, just maybe, so could she. When Claire finally pulled away from the memorial, A tiny smile flickered on her lips. It was small, shaky, but real. A stranger with calloused hands and kind eyes had sat with her pain, without trying to erase it. Sometimes, she realized, the deepest healing doesn't come from fixing what's broken. Sometimes it comes from simply honoring that it matters. And somewhere, deep inside, where her sorrow and her strength lived side by side, Claire knew she wasn't invisible anymore. The following morning, Keanu sat quietly at a small desk tucked away in his modest rental near the coast. A window overlooked the gray swell of the ocean, and the scent of salt lingered in the air. His laptop screen glowed dimly, the cursor blinking patiently. He hesitated for a long moment before finally typing out a short message on the Foundation's community forum. "Has a stranger ever changed your life without even knowing it?" He hit post and leaned back, unsure what kind of response, if any, would come. It didn't take long. Within minutes, the forum began to light up, comment after comment flooding in like a dam broken loose. One woman wrote, "When I was 17, I got into a car accident. A firefighter stayed with me until my parents could arrive. I never knew his name, but I'll never forget the way he kept telling me, 'You're going to be okay.' I believed him because he believed it." The note was shared. "There was a nurse when I lost my first pregnancy. She held my hand through the entire thing when no one else was there. She never said anything grand, she just stayed. It saved me." Scrolling through, Keanu found stories stitched together by invisible threads of human kindness. Tiny, unrecorded moments that had left scars of hope across people's lives. "A janitor at my high school," another wrote. "He'd always pick up my dropped books without a word, even when the bullies laughed. I think he knew what they didn't. That sometimes helping someone hold their load is enough." Tears prickled at the corners of Keanu's eyes as he read. Not from sadness exactly. It was something deeper. A recognition that the world, for all its noise and cruelty, still held 1,000 small, sacred mercies, most of them unseen. And then he saw it. A short, simple comment tucked between the others. "The smallest kindnesses change the heaviest days." He clicked to expand it. The comment was from a young man who had struggled with depression for years. He shared how a stranger once left a note in his locker. No name, no signature. Just 5 words. "You matter more than you know." That single act had given him the courage to ask for help the very next day. "I never found out who it was," the young man wrote. "Maybe they never even realized what they did, but I'm alive today because of them." Keanu sat back in his chair, letting the weight of those words sink into his bones. The smallest kindnesses, the heaviest days. Somewhere out there, Claire was carrying a mountain no one else could see, and yet, perhaps by sitting with her at a broken memorial under a bruised sky, he had helped her lift it, just a little. Maybe that was all anyone could do for one another in the end. Maybe that was enough. Keanu bookmarked the thread and closed the laptop softly, like a prayer folded shut. Outside, the tide was coming in, washing the shore clean. And somewhere in the distance, unseen but deeply felt, seeds of healing were beginning to take root. Keanu found himself thinking back to Claire's face that day. The rain had blurred the edges of everything, but not her sorrow. It had been raw, sharp, and so painfully honest. And yet, despite her heartbreak, she had spoken bravely, daring to voice the invisible burden so many others carried in silence. He returned to the forum thread, reading more. One woman shared how a stranger on a subway platform had once paid for her fare when she couldn't find her wallet. She was on her way to a job interview she desperately needed. She got the job, and with it, a second chance at rebuilding her life. "That $5 changed everything," she wrote. "And he'll never even know." Another story came from an elderly man who wrote about a teenage boy helping him load groceries into his car one windy afternoon. "I was so close to giving up that day," the man admitted. "But kindness, Even small kindness is a signal that the world hasn't forgotten you. Keanu sat back, breathing slowly. So many battles fought in the quiet, so many rescues no one ever heard about. He thought about Claire again, not just her grief, but her strength, her willingness to still show up at that broken memorial, to speak her husband's name into the cold wind. She hadn't known it yet, but her act of courage, her sheer presence, was an invitation for others to see her, to remember what so many wanted to forget. The comment that kept echoing in Keanu's mind came back once more. The smallest kindnesses change the heaviest days. He whispered it out loud, letting it settle into the room, into the very marrow of his being. Maybe that's why he had been drawn to the memorial that day, even without knowing why. Maybe it wasn't about fixing anything. Maybe it was simply about showing up, picking up the trash left behind, restoring a place that mattered, reminding someone that their pain was seen. Keanu glanced outside the window. The morning sun had finally begun to break through the clouds, casting soft light over the water. Tomorrow, he decided, he would visit the memorial again. Not to do anything grand, just to be there. Because sometimes, the greatest gift was not to erase someone's sorrow, but to honor it by standing beside it. Without judgment, without fixing, just standing there, just staying. And sometimes, that was enough to save someone's life. Claire sat at the weathered picnic table, wrapping her hands around the paper cup of coffee she had offered Keanu earlier. The rain had stopped, but the ground still held the scent of wet earth and salt from the ocean breeze. Across from her, Keanu stirred his coffee, absent-mindedly, as if lost in thought. Then, in that gentle way he said, "Have you ever thought about sharing your story?" Claire looked up sharply, blinking as if she had misheard him. A short, humorless laugh escaped her lips. "Me?" she said, shaking her head. "I can barely keep it together most days. What would I even say?" "You've already said it," Keanu answered softly. "Every time you show up here, every time you talk to the sky like he's still listening, every time you survive another day, when it would be easier to disappear." Claire dropped her gaze to the table. A part of her wanted to brush it off, to push away the idea as ridiculous. But something in Keanu's voice, something that held no pressure, only belief, stuck like a thorn in her chest. "You don't have to be perfect," he added after a pause. "You just have to be honest." Claire closed her eyes for a moment. Honest. That was a word that weighed heavier than any grief she had carried. Because the honest truth was she missed Jack so much that sometimes she forgot how to breathe. She hated the looks of pity people gave her in grocery store aisles. She hated that Emma barely remembered her father's face. Only the folded flag left on the mantel. She hated that the world seemed to have moved on, as if Jack's sacrifice had faded into nothing more than a footnote in someone else's history book. "I don't think anyone wants to hear from someone like me," she whispered finally. Her voice cracked on the last word. Keanu didn't argue. He didn't try to convince her. He simply said, "I think there are a lot of people who need to hear from someone like you." They sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that was heavy but not uncomfortable. Claire thought about the other wives she had met briefly at the funeral, their eyes hollow, their hands clutching the same folded flag she now kept on her nightstand. She thought about the young mothers who sat in the back of VA clinics wrangling restless toddlers while filling out endless paperwork, invisible to the rest of the world. And slowly, the seed that Keanu had planted earlier that afternoon began to take root. Maybe she wasn't brave enough. Maybe she never would be. But maybe bravery wasn't the absence of fear. Maybe bravery was standing up anyway, even when your hands shook, even when your voice cracked, even when your heart felt too broken to be heard. The next few days weighed heavily on Claire's mind. Every time she looked at Emma, bent over her coloring books on the floor, every time she passed Jack's uniform still folded carefully in her closet, the thought gnawed at her. She could stay silent, She could keep her head down and survive the way she had been. No one would blame her. No one would expect more. But then she remembered Keanu's words. Words that asked nothing from her except truth. One evening, after Emma had fallen asleep, curled up with her stuffed bear, Claire sat at the kitchen table with a blank notebook. The lined pages stared back at her, daring her to speak. She gripped the pen tightly, heart hammering. She wrote one line first. "My name is Claire Donovan. I'm the widow of Petty Officer First Class Jack Donovan, and this is what no one tells you about grief." The dam inside her cracked open. Words spilled onto the page, raw, messy, imperfect words. She wrote about the loneliness that felt louder than the silence. She wrote about the anger that no casseroles or sympathy cards could touch. She wrote about the nights she woke up gasping from dreams that left her clawing at Jack's side of the bed, empty and cold. When she finished, the pages were tear-stained and smudged, but they were real. They were hers. The next morning, Claire didn't tell anyone what she had done. She tucked the notebook into her purse like a fragile secret and went about her day, walking Emma to preschool, folding laundry, paying overdue bills. But when she visited the Coastal Memorial that afternoon, freshly restored and gleaming in the sun, Keanu was there again. Not sweeping this time, not cleaning, sitting quietly on the bench looking out toward the horizon. Claire hesitated before approaching. She pulled the notebook from her bag, fingers trembling slightly, and sat down beside him. "I wrote something," she said simply, voice barely above a whisper. Keanu turned to her, his expression open, patient. She handed him the notebook without looking him in the eyes. She didn't know what she expected: praise, awkward sympathy, maybe polite encouragement. Instead, Keanu just held the notebook in both hands as if it were something sacred. "I'd be honored to listen." Claire nodded, blinking back sudden tears. Maybe it would never get easier. Maybe some wounds didn't close all the way. But maybe, just maybe, the act of speaking, of saying the words out loud, could turn pain into something more, not less painful, but maybe more bearable. And maybe, for someone else who couldn't yet find their voice, her shaking one might be enough to open the door. The days that followed were a blur of courage and second-guessing. Claire met with Sophia from Keanu's Foundation, sitting nervously in the community center's back office, her notebook clutched tightly in her lap. Sophia was kind, her smile gentle but not patronizing, treating Claire not like a charity case, but like a storyteller the world needed to hear. "You don't have to say everything," Sophia said softly. "Just say what's true." Claire agreed to read a small part of her story at a local gathering, a support event for military families and widows. The night before the event, Claire almost backed out. She paced her living room while Emma slept in the next room, staring at the folded flag in its glass case. The medals Jack had earned, that he never lived long enough to feel proud of. "Help me be brave," Claire whispered into the dark. The next evening, Claire stood at the front of a small but full room. Folding chairs squeaked as people shifted uncomfortably, faces marked by the same quiet grief she wore every day. Keanu was there, sitting in the back, blending into the crowd. Not a movie star tonight, just a steady presence. Claire opened her notebook with trembling hands. She read about the silence after the funeral, about the friends who stopped calling, about the guilt that clung to her even when she smiled for her daughter. Her voice cracked once, twice. She wiped her eyes and kept reading. When she finished, the room was silent, not awkwardly, not coldly, reverently. Then came the first slow clap, and another, and another. Not applause for performance, applause for survival. Claire sat down, her heart pounding, feeling a strange lightness she hadn't felt in years. Not because the pain was gone, but because for the first time she hadn't carried it alone. Afterward, a woman approached her, middle-aged, wearing a faded army wife jacket. "My husband," the woman whispered, voice shaking. "He's been gone 10 years. I haven't said his name out loud since." They hugged, two strangers stitched together by invisible scars. Keanu didn't approach Claire right away. He gave her space to be seen by others first. When he finally did, he simply said, "You didn't just honor Jack tonight. You honored every silent story in this room." Claire smiled through fresh tears. Maybe she was still broken. Maybe she always would be, in some places. But tonight, she had turned the brokenness into something that reached other people. And that was a kind of healing Jack would have been proud of. The day of the local veterans gathering arrived sooner than Claire thought possible. The community hall wasn't large, just a simple room with folding chairs, a podium, a coffee table in the back stocked with paper cups and powdered creamer. A homemade banner reading, "In honor of our heroes," hung crookedly over the stage. Claire sat near the back, her heart pounding in her chest, her palms clammy despite the crisp autumn air. Emma, dressed in a little blue dress, sat quietly next to her, coloring in a worn notebook Claire had tucked into her purse. Sophia, from the foundation, approached quietly, handing Claire a printed program. Her name was listed second to last. "You don't have to say everything," Sophia whispered kindly. "Just say what's true." Claire nodded, feeling the familiar tremor return to her hands. She watched others step up to the microphone, an elderly veteran recounting stories of boot camp, a young widow thanking the crowd for donations that had kept her afloat. When the announcer called her name, Claire thought her legs might refuse to move. But then she caught a glimpse at the back of the room. Keanu, sitting silently, arms crossed loosely, giving her the smallest nod. Not urging, not pushing, just reminding her she wasn't alone. Claire rose on shaky legs and walked to the podium. The microphone squealed once as she adjusted it. She glanced at the faces in front of her. Grizzled veterans, nervous teenagers, tearful spouses, a few toddlers playing quietly on the floor. She cleared her throat. "My name is Claire Donovan," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I'm here because someone told me that sometimes the hardest stories are the ones that need to be heard the most." She paused, her hand trembling against the podium. "I lost my husband, Jack, 2 years ago. He was a Navy SEAL. He was brave, loyal, stubborn, funny. He never got to meet our daughter after her first birthday." The words hung heavy in the air. Claire swallowed hard. "For a long time, I thought grief would kill me. Not all at once, but by 1,000 little cuts. The empty house, the unopened mail, the silence at holidays, the feeling that everyone else moved on and I was still standing still." She wiped at her eyes, embarrassed by the way her voice cracked. "I didn't come here tonight because I'm healed. I didn't come because I'm strong. I came because grief is not weakness, and love doesn't end when someone is gone." Across the room, heads nodded. Some wiped their own eyes. Claire took a deep, trembling breath. "If you're carrying pain you think no one sees, I see you." Another pause. "And you're not alone." The hall was so quiet that even Emma's crayon against paper seemed loud. When Claire stepped back from the microphone, the room stayed silent for a moment longer, holding her words with reverence. Then, slowly, quietly, the first person stood, an older woman with a gold star pin on her lapel. She crossed the room, wordlessly wrapped her arms around Claire and squeezed. One by one, others followed. The line of people grew, winding gently through the rows of folding chairs. Claire felt each embrace like a ripple through the hollow places inside her. Places that had been empty so long, she'd almost forgotten they were there. No one rushed her. No one tried to fix her pain. They just stood with her, the way Keanu had that rainy afternoon by the memorial. A burly veteran with weathered hands pressed a small folded note into her palm. A teenage girl with tear-streaked cheeks whispered, "Thank you for saying what I couldn't." A woman about Claire's age, clutching a dog tag chain, simply nodded and walked away without a word. By the time the line faded and the hall returned to its quiet hum, Claire was exhausted, but in a way that felt strangely good, like she had laid down something too heavy to carry alone. Emma came running up to her, arms outstretched. Claire bent low and scooped her into a fierce hug, breathing in the warm scent of crayons and childhood. "You were brave, Mommy," Emma said, serious. Claire laughed through a new wave of tears. "I was scared." Emma wrinkled her nose thoughtfully. "You can be both?" Across the room, Keanu remained seated, his presence steady and unobtrusive. He didn't rush forward. He didn't break the sacredness of what had just happened. Instead, he offered Claire a small, respectful nod, a quiet acknowledgement that she had done something powerful tonight, something real. Later, as the crowd thinned and the volunteers packed up folding chairs, Claire found herself stepping outside into the cool night air. She stood under a battered old lamppost, the crisp wind tugging at her jacket sleeves. Keanu joined her silently, slipping his hands into the pockets of his worn jacket. Neither spoke for a long moment. The stars blinked dimly overhead, half Gino by thin clouds. Finally, Claire whispered, "Thank you." Keanu glanced over, his voice low. "You're the one who spoke. You're the one who made them feel seen." Claire shook her head, her voice thick. "I wouldn't have, if you hadn't listened. If you hadn't reminded me I'm not invisible." Keanu offered a soft smile. "Sometimes the loudest thing you can do is just stay." Claire looked up at the night sky, breathing in the cold air like it was the first real breaths she'd taken in months. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like a broken widow standing alone in the dark. She felt like someone starting to find her way back. And she wasn't doing it alone. Not anymore. The drive home was quiet. Claire let the radio stay off, the silence between her and Emma warm instead of heavy. She glanced at her daughter through the rearview mirror, Emma's small face illuminated by the occasional streetlight, eyes heavy with sleep. Claire's fingers tightened briefly around the steering wheel. Her heart ached, but it was no longer the kind of ache that crushed. It was the kind that reminded her she was still alive, still needed, still capable of building something new, even from shattered pieces. When they pulled into their apartment complex, Emma stirred awake. "Mommy," she mumbled, "can we plant flowers tomorrow?" Claire smiled softly, remembering the idea she'd shared during her speech, that healing could start as simply as planting something living. She reached back and brushed a strand of hair from Emma's forehead. "Yeah, baby, we can." Upstairs, after tucking Emma into bed, Claire stood by the window for a long time, watching the city lights flicker against the dark ocean. Somewhere out there, Keanu was going about his evening, probably unnoticed, uncelebrated, just like he wanted it. She thought about the way he listened without judgment, about how he never treated her like a charity case or a tragedy, just a person. Claire whispered into the stillness, as if speaking to her husband, to herself, and maybe even to the man who had changed her life without ever trying to. "I'm still here, and I'm not done." A few days later, Claire returned to the memorial with Emma. In her arms, she carried a small tray of flowers, bright marigolds, soft daisies, and one stubborn little rosebush. She knelt at the base of the newly repaired memorial, tracing her fingers over her husband's name, over the smooth new stone, the gleaming flag fluttering overhead. Their families had already left, small tokens, flags, notes, even a dog tag tied around the new flagpole. It was no longer just a forgotten place. It was alive again. Claire planted the flowers carefully with Emma, their hands getting dirty, their laughter mixing with the sea breeze. It wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about replacing the grief. It was about honoring it, living alongside it, letting it grow into something tender and fiercely beautiful. As they finished, Claire looked up and caught a glimpse of someone in the distance. Keanu, standing near the edge of the parking lot, hands in his jacket pockets, watching for just a moment. He offered a simple wave. Claire pressed her hand over her heart, tears rising, but this time, they didn't feel like drowning. They felt like rain after a long drought. She didn't need to chase him down to say thank you. He already knew. And she already knew something, too. She could survive this. Not by erasing the love she lost, but by carrying it forward, one small act of remembrance at a time. The idea came to Keanu late one night as he sat on a worn bench outside a modest coffee shop, the salt air from the ocean brushing across his face. He thought about Claire's story, about Mark Donovan, about all the names etched into memorial stones across the country. Names that too often faded from living memory once the ceremonies ended and the crowds went home. There had to be a way to make sure Mark's name meant more than a moment of silence once a year. Keanu didn't want a grand gesture. He wanted something real, something that would ripple outward quietly, like the way Mark's love had built the life Claire and Emma were still fighting to hold on to. He made a few calls, quiet calls to friends he trusted, organizations he respected, people who knew how to get things done without drawing attention. Within 2 weeks, the framework was in place. A new scholarship program, discreetly funded, managed through an existing foundation that supported children of fallen military heroes. It would provide tuition assistance for elementary, middle, and high school children, helping them grow into dreams their parents had once wished for them. And one scholarship, the first, would bear a very special name: the Lieutenant Mark Donovan Legacy Scholarship. Keanu made sure everything about it reflected who Mark was: a man who loved fiercely, protected selflessly, and never sought glory for himself. The application materials included only a simple quote from Mark's last letter home, something Claire had shared quietly during one of their conversations. "The best things I ever built can't be held in my hands. They live in the hearts I protected." Keanu asked the foundation to keep the donors anonymous. This wasn't about him. It never had been. The morning the scholarship fund officially launched, Claire had no idea what was unfolding. She was busy getting Emma ready for school, packing a lunch, tying tiny shoelaces, brushing out tangles from hair that seemed to knot itself the second Claire looked away. Life had become a series of these small battles. Some days she won, some days she didn't. When she opened her mailbox that afternoon, there was a single envelope waiting inside. No big logo, no announcement, just her name written in neat, steady handwriting. Inside was a letter from the foundation. Claire read it standing in her driveway, jacket half-zipped against the ocean wind. As her eyes scanned the words, her knees nearly buckled. She pressed her hand to her mouth, a sob catching in her throat. They had named a scholarship after Mark. Not just any scholarship. One that would help children who had lost a parent in service. One that would carry Mark's name forward, not as a reminder of death, but as a living promise to future generations. It wasn't just a memorial. It was hope. It was legacy. Claire stood frozen for a long moment in the driveway, the letter trembling slightly in her hand. Cars passed on the street behind her. A seagull called overhead. The world spun on as usual. But inside her chest, something shifted. Something heavy and buried cracked open, just enough for light to slip in. Emma tugged at her jacket sleeve, a peanut butter smudge on her cheek. "Oh, Mommy, why are you crying?" Claire wiped her face quickly, kneeling down to Emma's eye level. She smiled through the tears, a real smile this time, and pulled her daughter into a tight hug. "Because," Claire whispered against Emma's hair, "sometimes people remember the ones we thought the world forgot." Later that evening, after Emma was tucked in bed with her favorite stuffed rabbit clutched tight, Claire sat at the small kitchen table, the scholarship letter unfolded in front of her. She didn't need to ask who was behind it. Deep down, she already knew. The man who had listened without fixing. The man who had picked up trash around a broken memorial without needing anyone to notice. The man who understood that real honor isn't loud. It's quiet. It's steady. It's earned in the spaces where no one's looking. Claire pressed her hand against the page, right over Mark's name. "You're still protecting people, love," she whispered, "even now." The following day, Claire took Emma back to the memorial. They brought a small bouquet of wildflowers they had picked together from a nearby field, scraggly, imperfect, full of life. The coastal park looked different now. The brighter, not perfect, but cared for. Claire knelt by Mark's stone, arranging the flowers carefully at its base. The new flag overhead caught the breeze, snapping to attention. Beside the stone, a small bronze plaque had been installed. Simple, unassuming. It read, "For those who gave everything, and for those who live to carry their love forward." Claire sat back on the damp grass, Emma crawling into her lap, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she let herself breathe. She wasn't alone. Mark wasn't forgotten. And somewhere out there, a stranger had reminded her that grief didn't have to end in silence. It could become a bridge, a song, a beginning. The tide rolled in softly beyond the cliffs as Claire sat there, breathing in the salt air, feeling Mark's presence all around her. She looked up at the sky, at the shifting clouds overhead, and smiled. "I'll keep your light alive," she promised. No one needed to hear it. It was enough that she knew, and that somehow, somewhere, someone else did too. The news about the scholarship spread quietly but powerfully through the small coastal town. At first, it was just a few veterans who noticed. Then a couple of teachers at the local school. Soon, a few families whispered about it at the diner, over coffee and eggs. Each time Claire heard someone mention it, her heart squeezed a little tighter. Not from sadness, but from something unfamiliar at first. Pride. Mark's name was being spoken again, not in mourning, but in gratitude. Claire found herself visiting the town's high school one afternoon after a veterans event. She stood at the back of the auditorium, arms crossed protectively, watching teenagers bustle around setting up for the scholarship announcement ceremony. On a table at the front sat a simple frame holding Mark's photo, the one Claire had almost thrown away once during a night when the grief had felt too sharp to bear. Now it stood proudly among the banners and flyers about new educational opportunities for the children of fallen soldiers. A few students, kids who hadn't even been alive when Mark served, stopped to read the plaque beneath his photo. Claire watched as one boy, no older than 14, traced the words with his fingertip and mouthed Mark's name like a silent prayer. Tears blurred her vision, but she didn't wipe them away. She wanted to feel it all. Keanu didn't attend the ceremony. Claire had suspected he wouldn't. His gift wasn't about recognition. It was about restoration. It was about giving Mark's sacrifice a place in the world, beyond grief, a place among the living. Later that night, Claire wrote a letter. Not an official thank you, not anything formal, just a few lines written on a notepad she found in the kitchen drawer. To whoever made this possible, she wrote, "You didn't just honor a fallen soldier. You reminded a widow and a little girl that love outlives loss. Thank you for remembering him, and for reminding us that we still matter too." She didn't sign it. She just tucked it into an envelope and dropped it off at the foundation office downtown, knowing somehow, some way, it would find its way to him. Claire walked home beneath a sunset that painted the sky in shades of gold and fire. Beside her, Emma skipped, swinging her backpack back and forth. Ahead of them, the town stretched out, imperfect, small, full of memories both painful and beautiful. And somewhere, waiting just beyond the curve of tomorrow, there was a future she wasn't so afraid to face anymore. Because grief had not broken her. It had planted something inside her, something that still reached for the light. Claire never noticed when the small changes started happening. Maybe it was the first time Emma tugged on her sleeve while they were walking past the playground and asked, "Mommy, can Daddy see me from up there?" And Claire, instead of freezing with pain like she usually did, found herself smiling through tears. "Yes, baby," she said softly. "Daddy sees you, and he's proud." Or maybe it was the evening when she pulled out one of Mark's old photo albums, something she had avoided for months, and found herself laughing instead of crying. There was the photo of Mark during his first year of SEAL training, grinning like a fool, drenched head to toe after failing some impossible exercise. She could still hear him joking that day, "At least I made a bigger splash than anybody else." Claire traced her finger along the edges of the photograph. The ache inside her chest was still there, but it wasn't the kind that shattered anymore. It was the kind that warmed and tightened her throat and made her eyes sting. But it didn't knock her breath away. Grief hadn't left. But now there was space for something else, too. Oh, it was small at first, like a tiny seed pushing up through the wreckage of a broken battlefield. Fragile, stubborn, insistent. Claire realized it again when she attended her second veterans event. After her speech, several strangers, men, women, young teenagers, came up to her quietly. Some just nodded. Others shook her hand. One older woman, a Gold Star mother, hugged her tightly and whispered, "You said the things we were too scared to say." Claire didn't feel like a hero, but she no longer felt invisible either. That shift was everything. At home, she noticed how her evenings with Emma changed. The silence between them, once heavy and lonely, now held room for new conversations. Emma would show her drawings she made of their little family, Mommy, Emma, and a big smiling angel watching over them from the clouds. Claire no longer corrected the drawings, no longer wished them away. Instead, she pinned them proudly to the refrigerator with colorful magnets. Life didn't magically heal. The bills still needed paying. Some nights, the loneliness still pressed against her ribs like a weight too big to carry. But on other nights, Claire found herself standing by the kitchen window after Emma had gone to sleep, watching the stars blink into existence one by one, and feeling something she hadn't felt in a long, long time. A strange, breathtaking possibility. Maybe she wasn't surviving anymore. Maybe she was beginning to live again. The change wasn't just inside Claire. It reflected in small, almost invisible ways around her. At the grocery store, she caught herself chatting politely with the cashier instead of keeping her head down. When she and Emma passed the little coastal playground, she no longer flinched at the sound of children laughing. Instead, she let Emma run toward the swings while she sat on a nearby bench, sipping coffee, breathing deeply. The world hadn't stopped hurting. It had just started making room for light, too. One evening, after another small local veterans event, Claire was helping Emma into her jacket when an older man approached her. His steps were hesitant, his hat, a faded navy cap, clutched tightly in his hands. "I heard you speak," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "My son, he didn't come home either. I never knew how to talk about it." "Thank you for finding the words." Claire blinked back tears and shook his hand firmly. After he walked away, she knelt to zip Emma's coat and whispered, "See, baby? Daddy's still making a difference." Emma beamed as if she understood, and in a way she did. The next day, Claire stood at the newly restored memorial site, her hand resting on the smooth stone that bore her husband's name. The landscaping was beautiful now, the path clean and clear, the flag soaring proudly overhead. Small flowers, wild and vibrant, bordered the walkway. Claire didn't know who had arranged it all. She had her suspicions. She caught sight of him once, standing across the street, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, blending into the quiet morning crowd. He didn't wave. He didn't wait for thanks. Keanu simply watched for a moment, then walked away. Claire smiled through tears. Sometimes healing wasn't about grand gestures. Sometimes it was about someone simply choosing not to look away. Someone showing up again and again, without fanfare, without judgment, without demanding anything in return. It was presence. It was respect. It was humanity at its quiet, extraordinary best. Claire breathed in the salty breeze, feeling the warmth of the sun fighting through the clouds overhead. She brushed her fingers across her husband's engraved name one more time and whispered softly, "We're going to be okay." Emma tugged on her hand. "Mommy," she said brightly, "can we bring flowers next time?" Claire squeezed her daughter's hand and smiled. "Yes, baby," she said. "We'll bring flowers, every time." As they walked down the winding path toward home, Claire didn't feel like she was leaving Mark behind. She felt like she was carrying him forward, in every story she told, in every child she encouraged, in every small act of hope she chose to believe in. It wasn't perfect, wasn't easy, but it was life, and it was beautiful. The next Saturday morning, the sun broke through in full, brilliant force, scattering golden light over the coastal park. The air smelled of salt and freshly cut grass. It was the kind of morning that made you believe in new beginnings. Claire pulled up in her old sedan, Emma bouncing excitedly in the back seat. In the trunk, they carried a small flat of wildflowers, colorful bursts of purple, yellow, and white, donated by a local nursery after hearing Claire's story. Emma hopped out first, cradling a tiny trowel in her small hands. Claire lifted the tray of flowers carefully, the roots packed in rich soil. When they rounded the bend and the memorial came into view, Claire paused. There, already kneeling by the stone, was Keanu. He wasn't dressed in anything remarkable. Faded jeans, a soft hoodie, gloves smudged with dirt. His head was bowed as he worked, gently clearing the weeds that had sprouted along the edge of the memorial path. No cameras, no announcements, no audience. Just a man who had quietly shown up. Again, Emma gasped and ran ahead. "Hi," she chirped, waving her trowel. Keanu looked up, a warm smile breaking across his face. "Hey there," he said, his voice gentle. Claire approached slowly, balancing the tray of flowers against her hip. For a moment, they simply stood there, the three of them, framed by the open sky and the wide, endless sea behind them. Claire knelt beside Keanu without a word. She set the tray down and handed Emma a bright purple bloom. Then, with gloved hands, she dug her fingers into the earth. The soil was soft from the recent rains, easy to turn. Together they worked, a quiet rhythm building between them. Emma chattered softly about which flowers should go where, her small voice filling the spaces between them with life. Claire found herself laughing, really laughing for the first time in what felt like months when Emma accidentally got a clump of dirt on Keanu's jeans and gasped in mock horror. Keanu just chuckled, brushing it off easily. "No harm done," he said, winking at Emma. The hours passed without notice. Flower by flower, memory by memory, hope took root. By noon, the base of the memorial was surrounded by a blooming patchwork of color. Claire sat back on her heels, wiping a bead of sweat from her forehead with the sleeve of her jacket. Her muscles ached pleasantly, a kind of tired she hadn't felt in a long time. The good kind, the kind that came from doing something that mattered. Keanu stood, stretching slightly, his gloves caked in earth. They surveyed their work in silence. The memorial, once cold and forgotten, now looked like it was loved again. The bright flowers curled protectively around the stone, softening its edges, catching the sunlight in vibrant petals. Claire's husband's name, Mark Donovan, seemed to glow between the blooms. Emma tugged at Claire's sleeve. "Mommy," she whispered. "It's pretty now. Daddy would like it." Claire's throat tightened. She pulled Emma into a hug, holding her close against the sudden wave of emotion that rose in her chest. Keanu knelt beside them, setting his hand gently on Claire's shoulder, not to fix, not to intrude, just to be there. When Claire could speak again, she looked up at him, her voice raw but steady. "Thank you," she said simply. Keanu shook his head slightly. "No," he murmured. "Thank you for letting me be part of it." They stayed for a while longer, cleaning up the last of the empty trays and tools. Before they left, Emma insisted on placing one more flower, a tiny white daisy, directly beneath her father's name. Claire watched her daughter's small hands pat the earth down firmly, a fierce look of determination on her face. It was such a simple act, but it felt like something sacred, a beginning. As they walked back toward the parking lot, Claire turned for one last look. The memorial stood proud against the endless stretch of blue sea, framed by wildflowers and sunlight. It was still a place of grief, of loss, but now it was also a place of life, of hope, of memory, made beautiful, not forgotten. And in the quiet steps of a kind stranger who had asked for nothing, something broken inside Claire had started to heal. Claire sat at her kitchen table late into the night, a single lamp casting a warm circle of light over the paper in front of her. The house was quiet, save for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the soft breathing of Emma asleep in the next room. The pen hovered above the blank page for a long time. What could she possibly say? How could she fit years of grief, loneliness, pride, and love into a few short lines? She closed her eyes and pictured Mark, the way he used to grin sideways when he was trying not to laugh, the way his hand felt steady and strong wrapped around hers, the sound of his voice reading bedtime stories to Emma, thinking she wasn't listening from the hallway. Claire pressed the tip of the pen to the paper and began to write. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't polished, but it was real. My dearest Mark, I miss you. I miss you every day in ways I can't put into words. I miss the way you made the world seem safer, smaller, kinder. I miss the way you believed in things, good things, even when everything else felt heavy. There are days I get so tired of being brave, so tired of pretending I'm fine. Some days it feels like the whole world moved on and forgot you. But today wasn't one of those days. Today we planted flowers at your memorial. Emma chose most of them. She said you would like the yellow ones best. She's growing up so fast, Mark. You would be so proud of her. And today I didn't just cry for you. I carried you forward. I told your story. I spoke your name out loud without it breaking me. I promised our daughter that remembering isn't about sadness. It's about love that refuses to disappear. I miss you. I always will. But I'm learning, somehow, that missing you can live alongside hope, and that hope will keep us both alive in this world. I love you, forever and always. Claire? Tears blurred the ink as she finished, but she didn't wipe them away. They were part of the letter now, too. She folded the paper carefully, wrapping it in a sheet of clear plastic to protect it from the rain. It wasn't much. It wasn't enough. But it was something. Something real. Something honest. Something hers. Claire stood, slipping on her jacket, cradling the letter in her hands, as if it were made of glass. She would take it to the memorial tomorrow, not because it would fix anything, not because it would make the missing hurt less, but because some words needed to be said, even if the only ears that heard them were the stars, even if the only answer was silence. The next morning, Claire rose before dawn. The sky was still dark, heavy with low clouds that promised more rain. She didn't mind. Somehow the grayness felt right, like the world was wearing the same somber colors her heart carried. She dressed quietly, careful not to wake Emma, and slipped out the door with the letter tucked safely inside her jacket. The coastal park was empty when she arrived. Only the sound of distant waves and the faint rustle of wind moving through the trees kept her company. The newly restored memorial glistened with dew, the flag above it snapping softly in the morning breeze. Claire knelt at the base of the stone, her fingers tracing her husband's name. For a moment she closed her eyes and breathed in the salty air, steadying herself. Then, with shaking hands, she pulled out the letter. She found a small hollow at the foot of the memorial, where the landscaping rocks formed a pocket against the stone. Carefully, she tucked the plastic-wrapped letter there, pressing it gently into place so it wouldn't blow away. It felt almost like tucking a note into Mark's pocket before deployment, a secret between them, a promise kept. Claire sat back on her heels and whispered aloud, "I'm still here, we're still here." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Heavy with love, heavy with years, heavy with everything that had been lost and everything that somehow remained. The sky began to lighten at the edges, hints of gold brushing against the gray. Claire didn't move right away. She sat there, listening to the quiet, feeling the presence of something bigger than grief, bigger than loneliness. A presence she couldn't explain, but trusted anyway. A few minutes later, she heard footsteps approaching. She turned and saw Keanu, hands in the pockets of his worn jacket, giving her space but standing close enough that she knew she wasn't alone. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Claire stood slowly, wiping her palms on her jeans, and looked back at the stone one more time. Then she nodded. To Mark, to herself, to the life ahead, and walked toward Keanu. They fell into step together, walking back toward the picnic tables, the playground, the rest of the world that was waiting. There was no rush, no speeches, no dramatic goodbyes, just two people moving forward, carrying the memory of someone who would always matter. As they walked, the sun finally broke through the clouds, sending a single beam of light across the memorial, catching the wildflowers Claire and Emma had planted just days earlier. It was a small miracle. A day was enough. The sand was cool beneath Claire's shoes as she walked toward the shoreline. She stopped at the edge of the dunes, her hand shielding her eyes against the morning sun, now breaking fully over the horizon. She caught sight of him. Keanu's figure was small against the vast stretch of beach, moving steadily, hands still tucked into his jacket pockets, his head bowed slightly as if deep in thought. There was no audience, no cameras, no entourage waiting nearby. It was just him, walking alone down the shoreline, as quietly as he had entered her life. Claire stood there for a long moment, taking it in. She thought about all the ways people often made promises and never kept them. All the times friends had said, "If you need anything, call me," but disappeared when grief stayed longer than they could handle. Keanu hadn't promised anything. He hadn't made speeches. He hadn't tried to fix her brokenness. He had simply shown up, again and again, standing quietly with her in the unbearable moments when no words could help. Claire's throat tightened. The weight of gratitude, of heartbreak, of quiet understanding filled her chest all at once. She knew he didn't need anything from her. Not thanks, not praise, not a story told to the world. Still, she couldn't stop the words from rising in her heart, unbidden, full of meaning. Softly, knowing he couldn't hear her over the wind and the waves, Claire whispered, "Thank you." The words slipped into the breeze like a prayer, carried away toward the sea. Keanu didn't turn around. He just kept walking, steady and sure, like a man who had learned the quiet art of making a difference without needing to be seen. Claire watched him until he was just a silhouette in the golden morning light, blending into the horizon where the ocean met the sky. She wiped a tear from her cheek and smiled, a small, real smile that felt earned, not forced. Then she turned back toward the town, toward her daughter, toward the life that was waiting for her to live it fully again. She wasn't the same woman who had knelt by the memorial stone in the rain, speaking to a name etched in granite as if she were invisible. She was something new now, still grieving, still healing, but also growing. And somewhere, deep inside, she understood the lesson Keanu had given without ever saying it out loud. True kindness doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand anything in return. It just walks beside you, quietly, until you find your own strength again. And when you're ready, it lets you go. Claire's steps were slower as she made her way back up the path from the beach. The wind teased loose strands of her hair across her face, but she didn't brush them away. She let them dance, feeling strangely at peace for the first time in a long while. The town was just beginning to stir. A few early risers moved about, opening shops, watering flower beds, living their small, beautiful lives. None of them knew the journey Claire had taken over the past year. None of them knew the depth of the loss she carried. And yet, standing there among them, Claire realized something important. She wasn't alone. Not really. There were people who cared, even if they didn't always know how to show it. And there were people like Keanu, quiet helpers, invisible healers, who appeared when you least expected them and stayed just long enough to hand you the tools to begin again. She thought of the letters she had left tucked beneath the memorial stone. "I carried you forward today," she had written. And she had, with Emma's tiny hand reaching for hers, with her own laughter returning in stolen, imperfect moments, with the courage to speak her pain aloud, even when her voice trembled. Claire crossed the street toward her apartment, feeling the weight of her husband's dog tags resting gently against her chest beneath her jacket. She pressed her hand over them for a moment, closing her eyes. "I'm still carrying you," she whispered. And somehow, she felt an answer, not in words, but in the quiet warmth that filled her heart. She would carry him through every speech she gave, through every bedtime story she read to Emma, through every flower planted at the memorial. And somehow, through all of that, she would carry herself too. Not as the woman shattered by loss, but as the woman who had stood in the rain and spoken her heart, as the woman who learned that strength was not found in forgetting. It was founded in remembering and walking forward anyway. Claire opened her door, sunlight flooding into the small space she and Emma called home. The scent of coffee brewing from a neighbor's window drifted toward her, simple and comforting. Inside, Emma sat on the floor with crayons scattered around her, coloring a new picture. As Claire stepped inside, her daughter looked up and smiled. A pure, uninhibited smile that wiped away years of silent sorrow. "Mommy," Emma said brightly, "I made you a rainbow." Claire knelt beside her. The tears that rose this time were not just from sadness. They were from hope. She pulled Emma into her arms, held her tight, and whispered, "Thank you, baby." Outside, beyond the window, the ocean sparkled beneath the sun, and somewhere down the beach, a man kept walking forward, not needing applause, not seeking recognition, just trusting that even the smallest acts of kindness could leave ripples in the hearts of those who needed them most. The seasons shifted slowly along the coast. Claire could feel it in the crispness of the air, the softness of the light in the mornings, the way the town grew a little quieter before winter, and somewhere inside her something had shifted too. Not all at once, not with fanfare, but steadily, like a seed pushing roots deeper underground. It started with a conversation at the memorial site. One afternoon, a young woman visiting from another town had approached Claire shyly after seeing her tending to the flowers. She was newly widowed, her husband a Marine lost in Afghanistan, and she was drowning in the same lonely confusion Claire once knew too well. Claire had listened, really listened. She had not offered easy answers or worn cliches. Instead, she shared her truth, that grief was messy, survival was not linear, and healing wasn't about getting over it. It was about carrying it, learning how to breathe with the weight instead of fighting it. That simple conversation stayed with Claire long after the woman left. It planted an idea she couldn't shake. What if she could create a place for others like her? A place where widows could sit without being judged for their tears, where they could speak their husbands' names aloud without flinching, where silence was respected and survival was celebrated. Claire began researching quietly during Emma's naps and after bedtime stories were read. She found a small grant through a local veteran support organization and applied. She didn't ask for much, just a room to meet in once a week, a coffee machine, and a little funding for materials. Her proposal was simple: a peer-led group for spouses of fallen soldiers, with no formal therapy, just shared stories, quiet support, and hope. It was approved faster than she expected. The first meeting was scheduled for early spring in a sunlit room at the community center overlooking the bay. Claire wasn't sure if anyone would come. Part of her was terrified that she would sit there alone, folding and unfolding her hands while the minutes dragged by. But when the day arrived, 7 women walked through the door. 7 strangers, each carrying invisible scars stitched together by love and loss. They sat in a circle, nervous and raw. Claire introduced herself, voice steady despite the storm inside her. "My name is Claire," she said. "My husband's name was Mark. He served with the Navy SEALs, and I still miss him every day." Silence hung in the room, and then a ripple of nods, a soft exhale of shared recognition. The stories began to spill out, some in whispers, some through trembling hands. Stories of children left fatherless, of anniversaries spent alone, of birthdays missed, of memories hoarded like fragile treasures. Claire didn't try to fix their pain. She just made space for it. The group began meeting every week. Sometimes they laughed, sometimes they cried. Sometimes they just sat together, knitting or reading or drinking coffee, grateful for a place where they didn't have to explain themselves. The healing was slow, like everything real, but it was happening. As the weeks turned into months, Claire noticed something even more beautiful happening within the group. It wasn't just that they were surviving. It was that, piece by piece, they were beginning to build again. One woman decided to go back to school to finish her degree. Another found the courage to move out of the house that had become a tomb. One young widow, barely 23, brought her infant son to the meetings and started a scholarship fund in her husband's name with the help of the others. The ripples grew outward. Claire, inspired by their courage, started thinking even bigger. She met with the local high school principal and proposed a yearly essay contest, scholarships awarded to students who wrote about the real meaning of service and sacrifice. She named it the Mark Donovan Legacy Scholarship, ensuring that her husband's name would not be buried by time. Each scholarship awarded would help a young person chase their dreams, but it would also remind the world that Mark had lived, had loved, had mattered. Claire worked tirelessly, writing grant proposals late into the night, balancing meetings with raising Emma, and planning small fundraising events, car washes, bake sales, charity dinners. The town, once quiet in its sympathy, began to rally behind her. Neighbors who had once offered only awkward condolences now stepped forward with action. Veterans volunteered to speak at events. Local businesses offered to sponsor students. The scholarship fund grew faster than Claire had dared to hope. Every time she felt overwhelmed, every time she questioned whether she could carry it all, she would visit the memorial. She would sit by the stone where her husband's name was etched into eternity, and she would talk to him. "I'm still carrying you," she would whisper, "and I'm not done yet." Emma, growing taller and stronger every day, would sometimes sit beside her and ask questions about her father. Claire answered them honestly, without shying away from the hard parts. She wanted Emma to know that grief and love could live in the same space. One rainy afternoon, much like the day Claire first met Keanu, she stood at the memorial, planting fresh wildflowers. A small group of young widows from her support circle stood beside her, laughing softly, sharing stories. Claire looked around and realized something profound. This wasn't just about remembering the past anymore. It was about building a future that honored the love, the sacrifice, and the resilience left behind. It was about planting something living where there had once been only grief. The wildflowers, bright against the gray sky, waved gently in the breeze. Claire smiled, feeling Mark's presence not as a wound, but as a steady warmth that filled her chest. She didn't know where this path would lead. There would still be hard days, days when the weight of loss would threaten to drag her down. But she knew now she didn't have to carry it alone. And somehow, that made all the difference. Some heroes don't fight with weapons. They fight by standing beside those who've fallen, holding their memories upright. In a world so quick to move on, it takes a rare kind of bravery to stand still, to bear witness, to say with your presence, You mattered. You still do. Claire learned this truth not in a single grand moment, but in the quiet accumulation of small kindnesses: a stranger picking up trash by a memorial, a new flag fluttering in the breeze where none had stood, a coffee shared under a gray sky where no answers were given, only a heart willing to listen. Through the cracks of her grief, seeds of something new began to grow, not to erase the loss, but to honor it, to carry it forward with dignity, with stubborn hope. And what began as one woman's broken story slowly became a tapestry woven with other hands, fellow widows, compassionate neighbors, strangers who heard her speak and realized their own stories mattered too. This is what healing looks like. Not perfection, not forgetting. Healing is remembering and still planting flowers anyway. Healing is telling your story even when your voice shakes. Healing is standing in the rain by a name etched in stone, whispering, "I remember." And sometimes, healing is a quiet man walking away down the beach, asking for nothing, changing everything. Now we invite you to reflect with us. Has a small act of kindness changed your journey? Share your incredible story below. You never know who might need to hear it today. Every comment, every memory shared becomes a light for someone still finding their way through the dark. And if this story touched your heart, stay with us. Because next, we'll bring you a journey you'll never forget. When Keanu Reeves meets an orphan who looks up to him with a heart full of hope, what unfolds will leave you in tears and remind you that family isn't always born. Sometimes it's found. Stay tuned for a story of belonging, hope, and the extraordinary bonds we can create when we dare to show up. Every journey of healing begins with one step, often unnoticed by the world. For Claire, it wasn't speeches or ceremonies that changed her life. It was a stranger who knelt beside her pain without trying to fix it, without asking for recognition. And maybe that's what real heroes do. They show up when no one is watching. They offer a hand without expecting to be remembered. They remind us that even in the loneliest moments, we are not truly alone. Keanu never spoke grand words that day on the beach. He didn't offer easy answers. He offered something far rarer: his time, his silence, his humanity. And that simple presence became the anchor Claire didn't know she needed. From planting wildflowers with Emma to starting support groups for widows like herself, Claire's life was never the same. Not because her grief disappeared, but because now it had a place to breathe, a place to be honored. Every time she helps another young widow stand a little taller, Claire carries forward not just her husband's legacy, but her own, a legacy of resilience, of remembering, of hope blooming even from the hardest ground. This is the heart of an incredible story. Has a small act of kindness changed your journey? Please share your incredible story below. You could be the voice someone needs to hear today. Stay tuned, because our next story will take you even deeper. Keanu Reeves meets a young orphan who has no family, no fame, and no future, until a single meeting changes both of their lives forever. Prepare to feel every heartbeat, every tear, and every hope rekindled. Because sometimes the family we find is even stronger than the one we lose.